Hello, and welcome to Banjo Strings and Drinking Gourds, How America Culture Came to Be, the podcast at the Frontier Culture Museum of Virginia. I'm Alex.
And I'm Rachel. As we were doing our Worst Years podcast, we kind of went down the rabbit hole with London in 1666. So we decided that we needed an entire episode to talk about just what is happening in this horrific year in London.
Yes, London is an interesting city. When you look at America, we have many, many cities, many, many big cities. England seems to have one big city, and it's London, and it has been that way for a long time. It is a Roman city. They built walls around it. They built buildings. They were using it as a place for soldiers or legionnaires to retire. It got abandoned when the Romans left England, and then starting around the 800s, 900s, it became a city again. By our time period in 1666, the population is 460,000. To give you a comparison on how big this is compared to the rest of England, the next biggest cities are Bristol and Norwich, which, depending on who you're reading, they both are about 30, maybe 35,000 people. 10% of the population of England live in London at this time. It is really big. It is a pattern of if you can't make it in the countryside, you go to the cities. The majority of people are going to London to seek their fortunes. London was the headquarters of the Parliament side during the war. It was their most important city, and some would say the reason Parliament won the Civil War was because they controlled London and they controlled the trade and they controlled the money. It was incredibly fortified. When the monarchy is restored in 1660, it becomes the headquarters of the restored monarchy. Charles is based in Westminster. That's where the government is. The city is expanding towards Westminster, and eventually soon Westminster is just going to become part of London. And that sets us up to Charles as the king. It is 1665. London is very crowded. It is doing very well. But there is some bad news. There is war. The Second Anglo-Dutch War has begun, and London is on a wartime footing. The Navy is based at the Medway, which is very close to London, and they are getting ready to prepare to go to battle against the Dutch, where a series of terrible events happen over the next 2 years, which really makes you realize that truth really is stranger than fiction. An example of this, in the Royal Navy, they have a 64-gun frigate called the London. It was built in 1656, and on March 7th, 1665, it is heading out to join the fleet to go and fight the Dutch in the English Channel. On the way there, it's going from the Medway to the Thames, it blows up. Somehow the gunpowder got caught on fire, and it was a ship that has an accompaniment of over 300 sailors. Over 300 people died. It could possibly be much, much worse because it was very common as the ships are sailing that women and family are on board, and then just before it goes out into the channel, they disembark. So there could have been a lot of family members on board too when the ship blows up.
The ship the London blowing up was definitely a bad omen, particularly when taking into account that the following year was going to be 1666, an ill-omened number from the Bible, considered that contained the number of the beast as 666. Many people in London, or many people in England, thought that the world would end in that year. London during the whole of the 17th century had a death rate that was much higher than the birth rate, but the city kept growing in leaps and bounds. London's population in 1600 was 250,000, and by 1665 the population was 450,000, and by 1700, 625,000. The reason for such growth was the tremendous amount of people moving to London looking for work and opportunity. The city was crowded, filthy, and disease-ridden, but there was work and fortunes were being made in London. Interestingly, many of the people who couldn't make it in London end up as indentured servants in Virginia. Plague has been a fixture in London since the mid-14th century outbreak, and in the 17th century there was an outbreak in 1603. This outbreak caused over 30,000 deaths and was an issue during the coronation of James I. An outbreak in 1625 killed over 35,000, and an outbreak in 1636 killed over 10,000. In truth, plague killed numerous people every year in London.
And how do we know this?
Through the bills of mortality, a document produced each week in London designed to monitor burials and list reason for death. Plague appears on most of these documents. The winter of 1664 to 1665 was cold, which might have prevented an outbreak earlier in the year. The first cases for the Great Plague of London are listed in April of 1665. Samuel Pepys on April 30th writes, quote, "Great fears of the sickness here in the city, it being said that 2 or 3 houses are already shut up. God preserve us all," end quote.
The mayor of London was so concerned about the cases of plague, on May 11th he ordered that bonfires be burned all through the city with sweet-smelling additives to the fire. This is to purify the air. This is because they believe that bad air is causing the plague, miasma. And he also ordered all of the streets in all of the parishes to be swept, cleaned, and rid of dirt, filth, and rubbish. Surprisingly, this helped right away. The cases dropped soon after they did this.
This is really the first time London ever had some sort of organized sanitation.
The numbers picked up dramatically throughout the summer. The rich fled the city. The king and his court left in June of 1665, leaving the city and its streets void of people. Now that London is on pins and needles because of the plague, the first battle of the Anglo-Dutch War takes place on June 3rd. 88 ships of the Royal Navy versus 109 ships of the Dutch Republic. They sort of fight to a standstill, but what I find absolutely amazing is that you can hear the battle in London, and it goes on all day. No one knows who's winning or not. It's really a weird battle because the Royal Charles, the flagship of the Royal Navy, where the Duke of York, who's going to be the future King James II, and Charles II's brother, is in command of the fleet, and his ship defeats the flagship of the Dutch Navy. So the English make this a huge, huge victory. And one of the interesting parts is as the ships keeps exchanging cannon fire, one cannonball comes very close to the Duke of York and explodes, killing a lot of people around him, which makes the poet Andrew Marvell write his, the Duke of Buckingham's shattered head, the fearless Duke disdains, and gave the last first proof that he had brains, meaning that the brains of the Duke of Buckingham spread all over the Duke of York, the future James II, and therefore now he had brains because before that he really showed no sense of ever having brains. I might argue he didn't have any sense of having brains after that either. This is why the king is waiting for the outcome of this battle before he actually leaves London. What was London like in 1665?
Crowded. Very crowded, smelly, and really very unhealthy. Like today, it was better for the rich, as you had bigger houses and the option of leaving when it got too hot or for when plague outbreaks occurred. London was a city of 448 acres. Most of the land was within the original Roman walls, but in the 17th century, London had outgrown the city walls, and newly formed parishes were located outside the city walls and on the south side of the Thames. Most of the new people arriving in London were living outside the city walls. When Pepys says here in the city, he's referring to within the city walls. Today, London is 607 square miles, or 388,480 acres, with a population of almost 9 million. Hence, London was much smaller in size in the 17th century, but strangely more crowded, a deadly combination for a major epidemic.
So a handful of cases in April. Did the mortality pick up as the days got warmer?
It did. The key item in the spread of the plague, which I should mention with absolute certainty, was caused by Yersinia pestis bacterium, spread by fleas from rats and humans. There was speculation that cold weather could kill the fleas, but in the past, plague has flared up in the winter. So take that with a grain of salt, but in this outbreak, it raged over the summer and fall and died out in the winter. Why the 1665 outbreak was so severe is a mystery. Why this was the last outbreak in London is also a mystery. Pepys writes on June 7th, quote, "This day, much against my will, I did in Drury Lane see 2 of the 3 houses marked with a red cross upon the doors, and Lord have mercy upon us writ there, which was a sad sight to me, being the first of that kind to my remembrance I ever saw. It put me into an ill conception of myself and my smell, so that I was forced to buy some rolled tobacco to smell and chaw, which took away the apprehension." End quote. This reference was the belief in miasma, that bad smells or bad air cause plague. Hence the terrifying beak-like plague masks filled with good-smelling herbs doctors wore during the plague. The number of dead in June was 6,137. This figure was so alarming that King Charles II and his court moved to Salisbury. This move brought the plague to Salisbury, so the king and his court moved to Oxford by the end of the summer. Parliament soon followed and met in Oxford during the fall of 1665.
The worst month for the plague was August, where over 31,159 people died. Pepys writes on August 12th, quote, "The people die so that now it seems they are fain to carry the dead to be buried by daylight. The night's not sufficient to do it in, and my Lord Mayor commands people to be within at 9 at night, all that the sick may have liberty to go aboard for air." End quote. At this time, the Venetian envoy to Paris hears word from London, his informer, saying that there are carts going through the streets crying, "Bring out your dead, bring out your dead," which, as we all know because of Monty Python, means that maybe Monty Python isn't a comedy show, but actually a documentary.
You have to wonder how many times people actually said, "I'm feeling better, I think I'll go for a walk."
The situation was so bad in London, the Navy office, which Pepys works for, moves to Greenwich. Pepys occasionally visits London to check on his home and office over the next few months. Samuel Pepys, on August 15th, writes, quote, "We could dream and dream but such dreams as this, that then we should not need to be so fearful of death as we are this plague time." End quote.
One of my favorite Pepys quotes is his concern about wigs. On September 3rd, he writes, quote, "Up and put on my colored silk suit, very fine, and my new periwig, bought a good while since, but durst not wear it because the plague was in Westminster when I bought it. And it is a wonder what will be the fashion after the plague is done as to periwigs, for nobody will dare buy any hair for fear of the infection that it had been cut off the heads of people dead to the plague." End quote.
There is a new theory that human lice was also a carrier of plague, which basically everyone in the past had lice. So in hindsight, it was good Samuel was leery of human hair wigs.
The plague was still going strong in October, as Pepys writes on October 16th, quote, "But Lord, how empty the city streets are, and melancholy. So many poor sick people in the streets full of sores, and so many sad stories overheard as I walk. Everybody talking of this dead, and that man sick, and so many in this place, and so many in that. And they tell me in Westminster there is never a physician, and but one apothecary left, all being dead. But that there are great hopes of a great decrease this week. God send it." End quote.
The strangest Pepys journal entry was on September 25th, 1665, where he writes, quote, "It having pleased God that in this sad time of the plague, everything else has conspired to my happiness and pleasure, more for these last 3 months than all my life before in so little time. God long preserve me for it, and make me thankful for it." End quote. I'm really not sure how to respond to this part, but old Samuel Shore is a very vain and arrogant man in the midst of a great tragedy.
Yes, and on that thought, on October 29th, Pepys is in London and writes, quote, "But in the street did overtake and almost run upon 2 women, carrying a man's coffin between them, I suppose the husband of one of them, which makes me think it is a sad thing." End quote. The man had a sublime gift for understatement.
November 26th, quote, "I heard this day that the plague has come very low, that is 600 and odd, and great hopes of further decrease because of this day being a very exceeding hard frost and continues freezing." End quote.
That hope sounds vaguely familiar to those of us currently suffering through the COVID pandemic, with its rises and falls in cases. Pepys in the Navy office moved back to London at the start of the new year, and on January 5th, 1666, he wrote, quote, "And a delightful thing it is to see the town full of people again, as now it is, and shops begin to open, though in many places 7 or 8 together, and more all shut. But yet the town is full compared to what it used to be. I mean the city end, for Covent Garden and Westminster are yet very empty of people, no court nor gentry being there." End quote. The plague continued to decrease over the next few months, and on April 25th, Pepys wrote, quote, "The plague, blessed be God, is decreased to 16 this week." End quote.
Historians believe 70 to 100,000 people died during this outbreak, slightly less than a quarter of the population if the higher number is used compared to the overall population of London before the plague, which historians believe was around 450, possibly 460,000 people. The outbreak started in the new parish of St. Giles in the Field outside of the city walls, and most of the fatalities occurred in the newer parishes such as Stepney, Shoreditch, Clerkenwell, Crippen Gate, and Westminster. As Rachel mentions, this outbreak is a mystery as to why it was so bad and why this was the last major outbreak of plague in London and Britain. Recent speculation is the majority of the victims were people who had recently arrived in London, had yet to acclimate to all the diseases of city life. The other piece of the puzzle is perhaps people living within the city walls had been in London for a longer period and had developed a resistance to the plague.
To underscore the loneliness and severity of isolation during the plague, here's a passage written by Thomas Clark, who was quarantined in his house for 3 months. The daughter dareth not approach the mother, nor dares one brother to come at another. The father may not his own child come near, nor may the child the parents for fear. The mother doth bewail her child at a distance. The child oft wants the mother's strong assistance. Clark lost 2 of his children and had 3 become sick, and also writes of the dismay of having none of his neighbors come to care for his family or to even ask how they were doing. This isolation was incredible, and the fear was prevalent even within families trapped in the same houses.
Daniel Defoe was 6 when the plague was ravishing London, and in 1722 he wrote A Journal of the Plague Year. Interestingly, his name is not mentioned in the book, and he claims it was written by a citizen who continued all the while in London. The book is a harrowing account of the plague, and there are many connections to the present. Defoe writes of empty streets. The narrator becomes obsessed with the weekly mortality figures and confronts people still visiting taverns. The narrator of the book receives verbal abuse after a confrontation with the tavern drinkers and was gratified to hear they all caught the plague and died. The book ends with this: A dreadful plague in London was in the year 65, which swept 100,000 souls away, yet I alive.
The plague was over by the spring of 1666. King Charles II and the court returned to Westminster in June, and London was getting back to being a bustling center of trade and commerce.
As we've mentioned, the summer of 1666 was hot and dry, but 2 big naval battles took place over the summer. The first was on June 1st through 4th, where the English and Dutch ships again met in the English Channel, and it was a huge, huge battle where basically it was indecisive, but the English ships came out worse. They lost more men, over 1,500 English sailors died, 1,800 were captured, there were many that were wounded, and basically the English lost 23 ships and the Dutch lost 4 ships. The English, being the English, managed to write about this as being a great victory. The Dutch also wrote about this being a great victory, but it soon became apparent to the English that they actually did lose this battle. But really it was inconclusive because the bulk of the English ships were still there. The Dutch did not destroy the Royal Navy. The Royal Navy had a chance and were determined to rebound, and another battle took place on July 23rd, where 89 English ships versus 88 Dutch ships. And basically in the past, and this really isn't about this war or battles, the weather was more cooperative with the English, or I should say the wind was, and the English came out much better on this and inflicted heavy casualties to the Dutch, and the Dutch retreated and the English held the line, so there was much better. More interestingly, though, is on August 9th, Sir Robert Holmes, with a small flotilla of 7 ships and a few fire ships, attacked the Dutch port on the island of Vlieland. There were 170 merchant ships there, and they had 2 warships, and by the end of the day, the English had destroyed or set fire to 150 Dutch merchant ships, pretty much decimating the Dutch merchant fleet. They also went ashore, and there was a little town called West Terschelling, and I apologize because I probably just massacred how you pronounce that, where they managed to burn the town down. There was about 1,000 houses, and they burned all of them except for perhaps 30. This becomes known as Holmes' Bonfire. And this is important because of what's going to happen next in London. The one other aspect we need to mention about the war is that the French And January 6, 1666 came on the side with the Dutch. They never really took part in any of the sea battles. Their fleet was too far away, but it was another anxious thought among most English people that the French were at war, and whenever the French are at war with the English always worried that the French are going to do something in England.
The summer was dry and hot. On the night of September 1st, 1666, a baker, Thomas Fariner, banked his fires for the night. The bakery was located on Pudding Lane in the heart of the medieval city. Yes, mere months after the plague stopped ravaging the city, another catastrophe hits London, the Great Fire.
Yes, indeed, and it's hard to fathom what the people of London were thinking during these horrible events. The plague killed people, and the fire destroyed the old city. The fire started in the early hours of September 2nd. The weather over the next few days was dry with a strong east to west wind. The fire burned out of control until September 5th, when the winds died down and was declared officially out by September 7th.
The devastation was absolute and total for the old medieval city of London. The fire destroyed 87 churches, St. Paul's Cathedral, 436 acres mostly in the walled city, 13,200 homes, 52 livery companies, the Royal Exchange, custom houses, warehouses, and the London Guildhall. There are many first-hand accounts of the fire, and like the plague, Samuel Pepys is the most famous and gives a very descriptive account of the fire. There was also an account, and one I do not think was true, that early in the morning of September 2nd, the Lord Mayor of London was woken up and viewed the fire. He reportedly said upon looking at the fire that it was weak and, quote, a woman could piss it out, end quote.
Samuel Pepys on the morning of September 2nd made his way to the Tower of London and hired a boat. Quote, so I down to the waterside, and there got a boat, and through the bridge, and there saw a lamentable fire, end quote. He commented on people hurrying to the Thames, throwing their goods into the river, or looking to hire people to carry their goods away. Pepys decides he has to tell the king of the fire, possibly thinking the person who first did this would be rewarded somehow. Speculation on my part, but he is the person who is credited with telling the king of the fire. When he made it to Whitehall, he was granted an audience with King Charles II and the Duke of York, the future King James II, and writes, quote, they seemed much troubled, and the king commanded me to go to my Lord Mayor from him and command him to spare no houses but to pull down before the very way, end quote. Pepys makes it into the city. Quote, at last met my Lord Mayor in Cannon Street, like a man spent, with a handkerchief about his neck. To the king's message he cried like a fainting woman, Lord, what can I do? I am spent. People will not obey me. I have been pulling down houses, but the fire overtakes us faster than we can do it. End quote.
The Lord Mayor, Thomas Bloodworth, his reputation never recovers. He was replaced as the Lord Mayor as soon after the fire. I kind of feel sorry for him as he was put into an impossible situation. The only way to fight big fires like this is to pull down houses and make fire breaks. The person who gives the order has to pay for the houses, plus it might not work. The wind was very strong that day, and unless the order was given as soon as the fire started, it would not have helped until the wind died down. Still, he was the mayor during the time of the fire, so yes, he should take some of the blame. Going off of Pepys' quote about the lamentable fire, John Allison wrote a poem called Upon the Late Lamentable Accident of Fire, and one of his stanzas describes the fire as, its fury still increased in all, houses and churches undistinguished fall, resolved to know no limits now, less than a city wall. Still the fuel was removed, and still the fire its force improved, whose eager and devouring heat into the heart of the city eat, whose appetite no industry could quell. And when their costly wares were gone, the place they used to traffic on, Gresham's famous building fell. The fire was now so monstrous grown, it knew no proper fuel of its own, and scarce distinguished between wood and stone. The advantage stone had over wood was only that it stood. And what the founder's majesty had wore, now only counterfeited well what was itself before. As bodies in the dry Egyptian sand, upright in their repositories stand, preserved by warmth and kept from air, fresh as when living and as fair. But once exposed to outward touch, soon betray their age too much, by crumbling into dust, and our burnt stone is such.
Pepys writes about the chaos and movements of people moving goods to escape the fire. Soon the fire approaches where Pepys lives. Quote, about 4 o'clock in the morning, My Lady Batten sent me a cart to carry away all my money and plate and best things to Sir W. Rivers at Benham Green, which I did, riding myself in my nightgown in the cart, and Lord, to see how the streets and the highways are crowded with people, running and riding and getting carts at any rate to fetch away things." End quote. The fire is approaching Whitehall that on September 4th the king orders goods from the royal palace be moved to Hampton Court.
The one action Pepys is known for during the fire was this, written on September 4th. Quote, "And in the evening, Sir W. Penn and I dig another and put our wine in it, and I my Parmesan cheese, as well as my wine and some other things." End quote. Yes, Samuel Pepys buried his cheese.
As a cheese lover, I believe I would have done that too.
The winds died down on the 5th, and the fire was out a few days later. Londoners were homeless and in shock. John Evelyn writes, quote, "The poor inhabitants, some under tents, some under miserable huts and hovels, many without a rug or any necessary utensils, bed or board, who from delicateness, riches, and easy accommodations in stately and well-furnished houses, were now reduced to extreme misery and poverty." End quote.
The farm fields a few miles out of the city were filled with refugees from the city, some who have lost everything wondering what just happened. The scars of the fire do not go away, and Pepys writes of having nightmares of fire months later. Psychologists suggest that many survivors of the fire suffered from post-traumatic stress.
The shock of the fire led many to believe the fire had to be set on purpose, and it had to be a Catholic plot by the French, or the Dutch response to Holmes' bonfire mentioned earlier. There were many foreigners living in London at this time, and the mob and hysteric outbreaks during the fire may have killed a few of them, one who was carrying tennis balls that were mistaken for fire bombs. While the elite realized the fire was an accident, everyone was looking for someone to blame. This brings us to the curious case of one Robert Hubert. Mr. Hubert was a French Protestant watchmaker who was on a Swedish trading boat as the fire started. He escaped from the boat and soon was telling people that it was he who set the fire under orders from Louis XIV, and soon an army of 50,000 Dutch and French soldiers were going to invade England. He was tried and convicted of setting the fire and executed. The Earl of Clarendon later confessed, quote, "Neither the judge nor any person present at the trial did believe him guilty, but that he was a poor distracted wretch, weary of his life, and chose to part with it." End quote.
The question often asked about the fire is how many people died in it. Often the answer is 2 or under 10, but in reality no one knows, and recent speculation by historians suggests the number might have been in the hundreds or perhaps thousands. The fire burned so hot and at times was moving very quickly that many Londoners got trapped and burned to death, leaving no traces of themselves or anything of their lives.
The plague and fire do not seem to be a reason for emigration out of the country. Possibly because London started rebuilding right away, provided much-needed jobs for laborers, especially carpenters, brickmakers, and stonemasons. Many fortunes were ruined in London because of the fire, and many people never recovered. These people, it seems, instead of leaving England for the most part, returned to their home villages in the country to rebuild lives far from London. Yet London still draws people from all over England, and in a few short years the population rebounds and overtakes the population before the plague and fire. The population of London by 1700 is over 650,000 and still growing rapidly. The effort to rebuild the city of London took place nearly immediately after the fire was put out. But there was also competing thought about why the fire occurred. Puritan thought was that it was because of the dissolute nature of the Cavalier court. Royalist thought, on the other hand, was that the opportunity to rebuild the medieval city was granted by God to justify the restored monarchy, and that the fire was punishment for the execution of Charles.
There is a quote to say how hard and difficult this project was, where it describes London as there is nothing but stone and rubbish and all exposed to the open air, so that you may see from one end of the city almost to the other, and you can compare London, were it not for the rubbish, to nothing more than an open field. The first order of business was it was decreed right from the get-go that there would be no timber buildings in the new rebuilding of London. Everything was going to be stone and brick. They also decided to widen the roads, not to allow buildings to overhang the streets like before, and to outlaw thatched buildings in London. They had a lot of plans were made, and some were very grandiose with major avenues and such, but generally London got built on the same road patterns as was before. It took a long time, and there was a lot of court cases to figure out who owned what and where it was, because all the landmarks were gone, but London did rebuild. Within the first year of the fire, there were stone buildings being built. One of the big differences is the center of London became much more wealthier and the poorer people were put on the outskirts of London.
The center of the new city turned out to be St. Paul's Cathedral, as designed by Christopher Wren. From there, the city radiated out, as Alex said, in essentially concentric circles of wealth, leaving the poorer people into what will develop into the rookeries, largely actually what were the newer outskirts, like St. Giles, before the fire. Because of the prevalent theory that one way or the other, the fire was God's retribution for either the dissolute court or the execution of a monarch, rebuilding St. Paul's was considered very critical.
Even though everyone in England is focusing on London, the fire, and the rebuilding, the Anglo-Dutch War still continues. The English have lost interest because of the burning of London, but the Dutch have not. On June 4th, 1667, the Dutch raid the Medway. That takes them to the Chatham Dockyards, which is the center of the Royal Navy. 13 ships are sunk, 2 are captured. Some of the ships that are sunk is the Loyal London, which is the ship that replaced the London that blew up in 1665, the Royal Oak, the Royal James, and a ship that is captured is the flagship of the Royal Navy, the Royal Charles, and is towed away. This is the most humiliating defeat the British have ever suffered for their navy. 10 days later, a peace treaty is signed. It is one where there's give and take on both sides, but one of the things the English do get is the Dutch colony of New Amsterdam, which eventually becomes named New York. If you are interested in reading more about this, there is a book I recommend very highly. It is called 1666, Plague, War, and Hellfire by Rebecca Rydell, and it is brilliant and describes everything that we just went over with much better detail. It is a fascinating subject, and there is a lot that we did not put into this podcast because it could go on for days and days if we were putting everything that people were thinking, writing about, seeing, witnessing, experiencing during this very terrible year of 1666.
Hi there, my name is Davis Tierney. I'm the Director of Interpretation here at the museum. I just wanted to tell you all about a couple of events we have coming up here at the museum. The first is going to be our Juneteenth celebration that we are co-hosting with the Shenandoah Valley Juneteenth Celebration Committee. That is going to be on June 19th, that's a Saturday, from 9 to 5. We hope to see you there and at our Independence Day weekend on the 3rd and 4th of July. We're open for visitation 7 days a week, 9 to 5 every single day. And we hope we'll see you out soon.
So we hope you enjoyed Banjo Strings and Drinking Gourds. We bring you historical episodes twice a month. You can check out the Frontier Culture Museum online at frontiermuseum.org, on Facebook, YouTube, and Instagram. You'll find background on all the farms at the museum, information on upcoming events, and so much more.
If you enjoyed listening to this podcast, please consider visiting the website and clicking the donate button. Donations to the American Frontier Culture Foundation support programs like field trips, summer camps, and special events. We greatly appreciate it. See you next time.